morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to Day 3 of the 2021 International Conference on Official Statistics. On behalf of Statistics Korea and the United Nations Statistics Division, I'd like to thank all of the speakers and participants for joining us at this event. I am Hyunshim Amy Choi, Master of Ceremony of this conference. Our conference this year is organized under the theme of the role of data and statistics in understanding and mitigating risk, what we have learned from the crisis situations, including the global pandemic. Over the last 2 days, we have reflected on how disasters, including the global pandemic, have accelerated innovation and transformation in statistics and data systems. Today, we aim to stretch beyond the horizon and navigate ways forward. If you registered at the conference and are joining us through live streaming in our official conference website, you can choose either Korean or English channel using the live streaming menu option. Also, anyone joining us through our official conference website can participate in Q&A and discussion by leaving their questions and comments in the comment section located in the website under the live streaming tab. The website also provides detailed information of this conference, including its program, biography of speakers, and the presentation materials for downloading. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the keynote speaker for Day 3 of the ICOS. Mr. Samuel Anim, Government Statistician of Ghana Statistical Service, has been leading GSS's transformative agenda for modernizing statistical production, establishing a quality assurance framework, and ensuring organizational agility against rapidly changing economic and social environment. During the COVID-19 pandemic, GSS, under Mr. Anim's leadership, escalated their efforts in providing relevant data by conducting 3 surveys to track the effect of COVID-19 on businesses, the local economy, and households and jobs. In 2021, the first digital population and housing census has been implemented. Mr. Anim shared his insights in this pre-recorded keynote speech, so please turn your attention to this video.
I have the honor to welcome all of you to the Day 3 Session 6 of the International Conference on Official Statistics. This session has the privilege to look at issues around building resilient data and statistical systems, focusing on what we've learned from the pandemic, our responses to it, and explore some new technical and financial needs that are associated with official statistics. Given the focus of our session, I make an attempt to put my presentation in 3 broad contexts, where I look at issues surrounding the characterization of what we mean by resilience, the current discourses around statistical systems and the use of statistical data. We try to draw a distinction between statistics and data and statistical data. The second area of my concentration will be to tell the story of Ghana during the pandemic and the interventions that we put in place to prove the concept of being resilient and how to respond to pandemics. And I would end off my speech with some takeaways that we all would want to reflect on it moving forward. By way of characterizing resilience, I make an attempt to put it in 7 broad contexts. To begin with, it's important we appreciate the fact that there are 2 extreme ends to resilience. One that I characterize it as an ex post consideration, and the other that I characterize it as an ex ante consideration. And what I mean by these 2 characterizations of resilience is, once you do not prepare for it and it occurs, your reflections should be on how do I address the occurrence of an adverse shock that was not anticipated. And once you prepare for it and you have systems that you put in place for any kind of adverse shock, we treat resilience from an ex ante perspective. The third area that I put emphasis on in characterization of resilience has to do with understanding your modes of operations and variations in your performance in the event of the occurrence of an adverse shock. Once you are putting in place this consideration, two things should come to mind. Whether you've reached an optimal stage of your operations, i.e. if you're a National Statistical Office, whether your dispensations are in tune with the expectations as per your Statistical Service Law or what your functions mandate you to do. And the fourth area for consideration is the speed of recovery. That is the characterization of resilience is the speed of recovery. So it's not just the occurrence of an adverse shock, but what is critical here is that you had reached a steady state of performance and there is an adverse shock, and the concern is how fast am I going to recover? And once you're thinking about how fast you're going to recover, then the fifth issue kicks in, which has to do with the mitigation of the risk and the coping strategies. And here what you need to think about is what interventions are you putting in place? What are the synergies of the interventions that are being put in place, i.e. within your national statistical system, within your national statistical office, and within the broad economy. And then finally, you think about the timing of the interventions. So mitigating the risk in an attempt to ensure that you speedily get out of the adverse shock that has occurred will rely on three things, i.e. the interventions that you are putting in place, the synergies across the interventions, and the timing of the interventions. As a statistical agency, we need to prepare ourselves beyond just putting across statistical data once we are thinking about the characterization of resilience. And I strongly hold the view that we should make an attempt to internally assess the adverse shock or the pandemic from, again, three perspectives. What is your desired and your previous state of operations prior to the occurrence of the shock? What is your mode and state of operations after the occurrence of the shock? And once the interventions have been in place, you do an assessment of the mode and state of operations after the interventions have been put in place. And this will not have to be done only within the National Statistical System as an isolated organization, but in the broad context of how the country is responding to the pandemic. Having gone through this, I tried to make an attempt to look at the two other areas that are reflected in the theme for our session, which has to do with the national discourse on data, statistics, statistical data, and systems. All of us as national statistical offices or operators within the national statistical system, our core concern has surrounded the issues of generation, use, and storage of statistics and data for that matter. It is important to advance that conversation to where we're thinking about interoperability within the national statistical system and between the policy environment and the national statistical system. And here, once we are talking about digitization, the conversations around data, statistics, statistical systems should move beyond generation, use, and storage, and as I indicated, to begin to focus on the digital systems that have been instituted to ensure interoperability, one, across data, and two, between data and policy that is being made. And we in Ghana, some attempts are being made to ensure that this is tracked on a regular basis to prop up the use of data. And thirdly, what I put emphasis on the discourse around data, statistics, statistical system, is the whole concept of proving that statistics is the only way. And in times that I've advised on this matter, I place emphasis on what national statistical offices should begin to do, and they have to prove the concept that if you do not use data, these are the consequences. And this is pretty much different from showing the benefits of using data. What I'm putting emphasis on here is proving the concept of the consequences of not using data. And then the third area, which is reflected in our theme for this session, has to do with new technical and financial needs and the next steps. Indeed, I say little about this third area in the sense that I'm pretty much convinced that we really have revolutionized statistics, statistical systems, and data, both on a global scale and on a national scale. And now there are new platforms by which all of us are engaging from an international point of view. And I take this opportunity to highlight the last four fundamental principles of quality data, which has to do with obliging with international standards, making sure that you have international collaborations, and making sure that what you do fits into the overall framework of what is expected of you as a national statistical system. So there is a good leverage for us to benefit from bilateral engagement and also multilateral engagement. And that is precisely what Ghana Statistical Service in the last 2 years has been focusing on. On the front of financial needs, I am also pretty optimistic that we need not to look far, in the sense that statistical offices, should rise beyond the concern that we do not have resources to run our organizations, simply from the perspective that data is the new oil, because we need evidence to direct our investment. And here I touch on some innovative ways that some statistical offices are putting in place to ensure that they raise resources to run their own engagement. One is what Statistics Canada is doing with its census data. If you go on their website, they're creating a hub for small enterprises on how to use the census data to place their industries to make decisions on investment. And this is the thinking that as statistical organizations we should begin to avert our minds to, on how internally we can raise resources. In any case, on the global scale, resources are being sought for to ensure that NSOs that are in deprived countries can raise themselves up to a certain level to ensure that they can meet what is required. So here I tell the story of Ghana Statistical Service from three perspectives: within the National Statistical Office, beyond the National Statistical Office, but within the country. Therefore, we are thinking about within the National Statistical System. And lastly, I put emphasis on our international engagement. Within the National Statistical System, what we did during the pandemic, again, is to look at it from our expectations from the state point of view, our institutional responsiveness, and also what we did during the pandemic. Like a number of national statistical offices, we did roll out 3 rapid trackers, 1 tracker in business surveys, another tracker in household survey, and a 3rd tracker from the local economy point of view. We did put a dashboard to monitor the infection rate and also identified indicators that would precipitate the severity of the infection, i.e. areas where smoking was dominant, i.e. areas where they were not obliging with the hygienic practices. So you found on our dashboard these information to help government make a decision on where the intervention should be focused. And also through other means, we engage the public, one from an opinion point of view on how we think the pandemic would rise, plateau, and if it's going to dip, it does. So from a statistical agency, we really were proactive in the kind of things that we had to do to ensure that the pandemic is abated. And again, from the national point of view, we got the National COVID Response Team and the Ministry of Finance falling under Ghana Statistical Service for data to ensure that the policies that are put in place align with what we do. What is more important, which I want to put emphasis on, is proving resilience during a pandemic. And what I mean by proving resilience during a pandemic is not relenting on your national statistical releases, i.e. the inflation, the national account, and thankfully we obliged to release all our scheduled core national statistics, i.e. inflation and national accounts. What is more important, which I want to emphasize on, is other national activities that rarely occur, such as the censuses and the fact that you are able to hold yourself in a manner that you don't relent your preparation in the event of a pandemic. So throughout the pandemic, we continue to put in interventions that would continuously help us prepare for the census, and thankfully we've done our 2021 population housing census. Data collection has ended, and currently we are doing field clearance to ensure that within 3 months since the data collection ended, we're going to put up our preliminary results. So we've proved the concept of resilience to a point that even in the face of pandemic, Ghana is one of the countries that have been able to do not just a census, but its first fully digital census and also an in-person census, which pose a high risk amid COVID-19 and the associated consequences. The second area in the storytelling is our external engagement within the National Statistical System. And again, here we're talking about harmonization within the among the various ministries, departments, and agencies that produce statistics, that use statistics, and that store statistics. And what we are putting emphasis here is lobbying to an extent that would make the National Statistical Office indeed the coordinator within the National Statistical System. And what I mean by lobbying here is that you get higher state agencies that would bring the key players together to ensure that they adhere to what their respective mandate is in a way that statistics is coordinated in the country. So 2 things that we did was to get the Vice President's office to bring to the table some key agencies, i.e. the National Identification System, the Ghana Immigration System, the Birth and Death Registry in Ghana. Since as a country, amid COVID-19, we kept asking ourselves, are we going to continue to collect data in the traditional way, or are we going to drift to the non-traditional data sources, which is the order of the day? So we're working towards a transition to administrative data. For that reason, we had that higher governmental coordination to bring these institutions together to properly think through a scheme where we can harmonize our statistical processes. So fortunately, prior to the pandemic, we had started some, we had resorted to some non-traditional data sources, i.e. we're heavily involved in the call detail records, which we used extensively during the pandemic to look at mobility and how infection rates are panning out. We're using our citizens-generated data to capture data from the perspective of domestic violence and waste. We're using big data in different respects to ensure that we get a better understanding of what is happening within the national statistical system. So we were more or less prepared in several perspectives ahead of the pandemic, especially at a time that as a statistical agency, just within a year of the pandemic, our new law had been passed. We had just launched our corporate plan for the period 2020 to 2024. We had gotten onto the harmonization project in West Africa, which is being funded by the World Bank. We had done a staff satisfaction survey. We had developed a document on competency framework. So just ahead of the pandemic, within the organization, there were quite a number of interventions that were in place and that had made the organization more recognizable, more useful within the economy. So it sort of set the pace for us to make ourselves more relevant during the pandemic. And it's worth mentioning that all these were made possible because we had harnessed quite a number of bilateral and multilateral collaborations, i.e. having some informal relationships with institutions such as the Kenya Bureau of Statistics, such as Statistics Rwanda, and also some formal relationships with the Office of the National Statistics in the UK, Statistics Denmark, and Statistics Norway. And from the multilateral point of view, as I indicated, we had engagement with the United Nations Development Program that funded 2 of the 3 COVID-19 trackers. We had engagement with World Bank, which I talked about earlier on the harmonization and improving statistics in West African project, and also ongoing collaboration with UNICEF, which partly funded the COVID-19 tracker on household survey. So on the multilateral front, we had quite a number of interventions that were going on ahead of the pandemic that put us in place. And this is the ex-ante dimension that I talked about earlier on in terms of the characterization of resilience. I would end off my presentation with 3 takeaways, and the first takeaway is accepting and getting to the recognition and making others aware that data is the only way to go. And from my point of view, if you want to do this, there are 2 things that you need to do. As I indicated, you need to prove the concept of the implications of not using data. So in the event where something happens and there's no data to say that we did not see it coming, that is the cost that I'm talking about, and we should be able to not qualitatively talk about it, but put some financial cost to it and say that if we had had data, this would have been the implications. So one of the things that we did ahead of the census is to put out there how the census would have given us data in a way that in the event of the COVID-19, all the stimulus packages that were going to households, we could have done that in a way that it wouldn't be on ad hoc basis. So we made an attempt to provide the unit cost of an indicator for the census, and also making a case that moving forward, we don't have to wait decennially to do the census, but getting into the hybrid of using administrative and other big data sources to provide some information on areas where we can easily intervene with data in the event of pandemic. So now there's a conversation around bringing all the telcos together to see how we can use that rich big data source to inform where we need to put our resources in the event of a pandemic. And lastly, my takeaway message is sustaining this proof of concept. So it's not just a matter of doing it once, but it's a matter of doing it regularly, because you need to look at it from multiple perspectives. As I said, it's just one perspective looking at it in the event of a pandemic, but in all other policy areas, we need to sustain the proving of the concept that if we do not use data, these are the consequences. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank Mr. Anim for addressing resilience of statistical systems with enriching examples of Ghana, and thank everyone for your attention. Now, I'd like to invite you all to join session 6 without any break. The chair of session 6 is Mr. Craig Hammer, program manager with the Development Data Group at the World Bank. Mr. Hammer specializes in the reformation of governance with a special focus on access to information, open government data, and data-driven decision-making for improved public service delivery to marginalized and underserved communities. He is co-author of the 2021 World Bank Report, a secretariat member for the World Bank's data governance body, and manager of the World Bank Global Data Facility, which is the bank's primary financing mechanism to support low and middle income countries' data priorities. With this, I'd like to invite Mr. Hammer to the stage for session 6.
Good morning and good evening, everyone. I'm very pleased to welcome to session number 6 of the International Conference on Official Statistics. As I was very graciously introduced, my name is Craig Hammer. I'm a program manager with the World Bank's Development Data Group, and it is my distinct pleasure to serve as moderator for this interesting and timely discussion today. Our session is entitled Building Resilient Data and Statistical Systems. What have we learned from our response to the current crisis? We've assembled a very distinguished group of experts to share their insights and experiences with you today. Our presentations and discussions will focus on how the data and statistics community can emerge stronger from crisis situations, especially the global pandemic. Key questions for our speakers' attention today include, what do more resilient data and statistics systems which serve the public good look like? How can we enhance the agility of these systems to better meet future crises and disasters? What key pieces of advice can you share with those of us who are looking to provide better and more effective support for data and statistical systems? We have about 85 minutes for our session. We're joined by 5 speakers today. Unfortunately, our 6th speaker was unable to join us. So I'll briefly introduce each speaker just before they give their remarks. And if all goes according to plan, we should have several minutes at the end of the presentations for a brief Q&A before we conclude our session. To ask a question, please type it in the chat. And if it's a question for a particular speaker, please be sure to identify that speaker in your question. We'll strive to get to as many questions as we can. Now, before we begin, I want to thank our hosts, this is Korea and UNSD, for making this discussion and the broader conference possible. And I want to thank our distinguished speakers for sharing their time and expertise. I also would like to thank you for joining us today. Now, without further ado, let me begin by introducing our very first speaker. Mr. André Loranger is Assistant Chief Statistician for Strategic Data Management, Methods and Analysis with Statistics Canada. He is also Chief Data Officer responsible for the overall stewardship of the organization's information and data holdings. Let us now turn to Mr. Loranger for his remarks.
Thank you, Craig. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd also like to thank the organizers for organizing a very good conference and hopefully what turns out to be a good session. I'm looking forward to hearing the presentations today. You described a bit of my role at Statistics Canada. I just thought I'd fill in a few more blanks. So in my role in the organization, I'm responsible for all of the applied research, the statistical methodology, the data science, and also the management of our information holdings. So that includes data, but all our sort of our other information holdings that we have. And I think sort of given that role, played a really central role in terms of our Statistics Canada's pandemic response, in terms of the data products and so on. A lot of the coordination of the of our pandemic response and some of the data products that we put out and so on was managed through my office. So today my talk will, and I guess I should share my screen now and put the presentation on, if you'll allow me a few seconds to do that. Okay, here we go. And I'll put that in presentation mode. Can everybody see my screen? Okay, good. So let me skip to the next slide. So in terms of the background for my discussion today, I want to talk a little bit about the Canadian context and provide a quick overview of our response to the pandemic, obviously. We'll talk a little bit about what we've learned and focus on three key areas or lessons learned, being the need for greater data stewardship across the system, the need for more granular data, and also data ethics. Finally, I'll conclude with where do we go from here. And again, I believe the emphasis there should be on sharing, collaboration, and education and promoting data literacy. So I'll flip my slides. I'm already on my first slide. So I'd like to give a little bit of context again with respect to the Canadian experience. And for that, we need to go back a few years and talk about Statistics Canada's Modernization Initiative. So beginning in 2017, Statistics Canada embarked on a large modernization journey. And we were looking at ways to really better respond to the needs of Canadians and really, you know, thinking about the evolving and expanding data ecosystem and all the different players that are emerging. We wanted to address specific needs with respect to data literacy and data management outside of the national statistical system. So it's the Wild West out there with respect to data and so on. We have a lot of expertise to bring because we are experts in the management of data. And we thought that this was an important contribution that we could make to the statistical system. And of course, our modernization was centered around better understanding the user needs and to be more responsive. So we organized our modernization initiative around 5 pillars. So the first, and this is really an overarching pillar, is really about a user-centric service delivery. And here what we mean is providing, again, providing data products and information products. And I make a distinction between the two because we really are about integrating data to provide information, but making sure that the information that we provide is actually the information that users need. It's accessible to them and it's available in formats that they can readily use and so on. So we put a lot of emphasis there. How do we achieve modernization? Well, it's through leading edge methods and data integration, realizing that we are shifting away from a survey-centric world where we want to incorporate all kinds of new data sources, whether they be geospatial, big data, and so on. And to do that, we need leading edge methods again. So the big focus here on data science and so on. We realize that we can't create the national statistical system that we need without building, without sharing and collaboration. I'm going to skip to that next pillar first. So this is really fundamental, and it really played a big role in terms of our pandemic response too. We realize that we can't do everything, and we need to leverage partners and stakeholders to make sure that we are putting out credible and relevant information. Within our country, and I suppose the same thing applies in every other country, statistical organizations have a large capacity with respect to statistics and managing data, but we can do more with respect to promoting data literacy and providing leadership in terms of data stewardship. And the last pillar was a modern and flexible workplace. And you know, here we want to hire the best and the brightest, but we also want to provide a work environment that that is conducive to collaboration and progressing as a statistical organization. So I'll switch slides. So basically, our Modernization Initiative really positioned us well to respond to the pandemic. So at Statistics Canada, we were really started being impacted by the pandemic on March 13th. And on that day, the federal government decided that for the safety of the employees and to control the pandemic, that we were going to work from home. So everybody was shifted out of the physical premises. And 18 months later, we're still sort of working remotely, and I think we're doing quite well. In fact, I think we haven't skipped a beat. But the modernization agenda had positioned us really well to be able to make that transition. So early in the pandemic, the big challenge was sort of shifting the work to the remote environment. So making sure that people were equipped, making sure that we had sort of the tools in place to actually do our work, and those challenges within a few weeks were addressed, and we were off and running. One of our basic focuses throughout the pandemic, especially early on, was the safety of our staff and our employees, and to make sure that they were equipped. We took the approach that early on we would focus on the mission critical programs, and also focus on addressing the data needs of the pandemic. And our entire focus as an organization was geared toward that. So when I talk about mission criticals, it's really the key economic indicators that we've come to expect statistical organizations to produce, like the CPI and the GDP and so on. So we have a number of mission critical programs, including the Census. But we added sort of this COVID lens to it as well, to make sure that we were able to provide information on sort of the evolution of the pandemic through the course of the year. So we established key principles for responding to the COVID-19 information needs. And here the idea was that we wanted to be timely and relevant. And in this case, we adopted the strategy that speed trumps perfection. Statistical organizations are not always known for their timely products. It's always been a criticism of official statistics. And here, the information needs were very current, and we had to change the ways that we work and adopt new methodologies to sort of address that. And I'll get into that a little bit later. We wanted to leverage innovative methods. Again, I talked about data science earlier, so artificial intelligence, machine learning, nowcasting. We relied a lot on modeling, projections, and we also developed interesting ways to collect data, including crowdsourcing approaches and web panel surveys that we could roll out very quickly to get information. We had to adjust our governance, and we really adopted a lean management and a light governance, where decisions needed to be made rapidly. As well, we relied heavily on external partnerships, and we did a major rethink of our models for collaboration. And we collaborated with many entities that in the past we wouldn't have, or the collaboration was there, but it would have taken a lot longer. I think everybody understood that there was an urgency to what we were doing, and that worked quite well. And of course, we wanted to act within our legislative framework, and we take, as a statistical organization, we're based on the trust that Canadians put in our organization. So we really put a lot of emphasis on a necessity and proportionality in terms of collecting information, but also on the ethical use of data. So in terms of responding to information needs, this slide sort of articulates two big buckets of work. So the first one is the products that we put a lot of emphasis on in terms of our pandemic response. So quickly on our website, we set up an area for social health, economic impact, and analytical products. So we have obviously a very vast collection of data holdings in the organization, and we really repurposed a lot of that those data holdings to produce analytical products related to the pandemic. We shifted our priorities a bit to make sure that we were tracking the pandemic and also measuring the resulting structural changes from the pandemic. We put out economic dashboards of near real-time indicators. We enhanced a lot of our surveys, in particular sort of our monthly survey programs on the business side. And we started to produce flash estimates and nowcasting of GDP and other economic measures. We did a lot of work on the geospatial side, putting out products with using our geospatial tools like our Statistical Geospatial Explorer that we put out sort of during the pandemic. That allowed us to layer all kinds of information in a mapping environment that was really user-friendly and allowed users to quickly understand the data. Again, I talked about new data collection mechanisms such as crowdsourcing and web panels, and we really went to look at how the feelings and how Canadians were feeling. On the right side of the slide is really about enhancing the data stewardship and providing a service to the frontline agencies in Canada that were actually fighting the pandemic. So we set up, for example, a system where we were monitoring the supply chain and then the supply and demand of PPE equipment. We developed all kinds of modern mapping tools for the frontline agencies. We developed local pressure indicators in terms of hospital beds and so on. We were doing vaccine forecasting and dashboards and also analysis of testing and also some contact tracing so we have a big collection capacity, and we were asked by the federal government to help support contact tracing of cases. And as well, we leveraged our modeling and surveillance expertise to develop all kinds of epidemiological models and so on. So our response was basically twofold. Really focused on a lot of products that were certainly more timely and more granular, responding to the pandemic needs, and also this whole side which was more about data management and providing our expertise where we were needed. I'll switch slides now. And in terms of expanding data stewardship, our position here was that we were there to help. We have a very strong data capacity, and we've got a lot of expertise in terms of managing large data sets and sort of manipulating large data sets, and we offered that to whoever needed it. Again, and we leveraged that data integration, modeling, analysis to really produce those products that I talked about in the previous slide. We put a lot of emphasis on our statistical and our IT infrastructure. And again, we developed all kinds of collaborative spaces on the cloud and so on to be able to leverage that collaboration with partners. We were able to leverage the right network of partners and again, utilize our legislative framework to really make sure that that the data we were producing and used really factored in the privacy of Canadians and the ethical use of data. So what did we learn from the pandemic, and how do we continue to increase the resilience? Well, the first thing I think is that, as I mentioned earlier, our modernization really positioned us well to be responsive. We were ready, and I think when the crisis came, we were able to deploy a lot of the things that we had been working on, albeit quicker than perhaps we would have normally, but we were well positioned. We learned, though, that there's a need for enhanced data stewardship. an enhanced data stewardship role by trusted partners. So, you know, how do we leverage all those data, and who do you trust to actually manage those data sets? And in Canada, certainly there was a lot of stakeholders that were turning to us to sort of play that role. We also found out that there is certainly a need for more granular statistics. So and this cannot be like, it really needs to be emphasized. Everything that we were doing was about more timely, but also more detail. Hey, like, how do you break this down into demographic groups, into regions, and so on? And of course, again, I'll reemphasize sort of the data ethics and the trust are really, really essential. And as an example of the power of disaggregation, so we conducted some survey work in terms of the willingness of Canadians to be vaccinated. And some of the results here on this slide show that, you know, for the population aged over 18 and over, 77% were willing to take vaccines. However, when you start breaking that data down into, you know, more disaggregated ways, so in terms of the racialized and non-racialized communities, you see that the percentages start to differ. And then when you look at the racialized segment of that population, you see that the demographics are very different depending on which demographic segment that people were part of. And then you can further break that down. If we look at the Black population, for example, there's a big difference between male and female. So the key here is that you know, granular data is really critical for policymaking. And we are now turning our attention at StatScan to really expand our data holdings and disaggregate them as much as possible. Now we've taken a holistic approach to this. Obviously, we want to make sure that we promote data standards for the collection of disaggregated data. But that's all of the data holdings within the Federal Public Service. I think so. As programs roll out, we do have a lot of expertise in terms of standards, and, you know, where possible, those data should be collected based on those standards. Our focus, obviously, in some cases, we're going to need to expand the size of our surveys to make sure that, you know, at certain levels, the data is representative of the populations as we try to disaggregate. We're going to want to put a lot of emphasis in terms of enhancing the longitudinal nature of the work. We're going to want to produce a lot more indicators on statistics related to vulnerable and diverse populations. And at the end, our goal is really to disaggregate data at the lowest level possible while still protecting privacy and confidentiality. So we're really working on that now. We've got what we call our disaggregated data action plan, and going forward, we're really going to put a lot of emphasis on this because as the pandemic has revealed, this is really what is needed in terms of our user community. And lastly, I want to finish on a little bit on you know, this trust element. So as statistical organizations, obviously our business relies on the trust of our stakeholders. If they don't trust us, it's hard to collect data, and nobody believes, you know, what you put out. So we put a lot of emphasis on building robust models, on explaining to Canadians what we're doing, on explaining to Canadians how we protect their information. I encourage people to look at our website. We have what we call our Trust Center that you can easily find on our website. And it talks about all the things that we are doing to protect and preserve and enhance the trust that stakeholders have in our data. And finally, I'll end with what's next. Well, our lessons learned from the pandemic are many. But to summarize sort of where we need to go looking forward, we need to enhance sharing and collaboration. We need to do a little bit more, actually a lot more education with respect to what are good statistics. How do you, in the landscape now of data, in the data ecosystem now, there's data everywhere. How do you know that it's that the data is credible and reliable and so on? So there's a lot of education that we can produce, and promoting data literacy, and all that put together will increase the resilience of the statistical system. So thank you very much. I look forward to your questions, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and turn it back over to you, Craig.
Thank you very much, Andre. Fascinating presentation and lots to dig into during our discussion and Q&A period a little bit later on in the session. Let's go ahead and move on to our second speaker, Ms. Claudia Wells. Claudia is the Director of Data Use at Development Initiatives, which is an independent organization set up to use data and information to end poverty. Claudia leads several programs of work, including on using data to track the development progress of the world's poorest people, as well as a program to understand and address critical barriers to data use, among others. Let's turn to Claudia for your remarks. Claudia.
Thank you, Craig, and thank you so much to the organizers for the invite to speak on this panel, and thank you to Andre for the wonderful first presentation there. I always find it really difficult to follow Stats Canada. They're always doing such fantastic work, but I hope that my presentation, which I'm about to share with you now, will echo actually some of the things and the findings and key lessons that that Andre mentioned as well, more from the perspective of us outside that official system, trying to support the development of those robust systems. So thank you very much. As Craig said, DI, we work to apply the power of data and evidence to build sustainable solutions, and we work really closely with partners to ensure that data-driven evidence and analysis is used effectively, both in policy and practice. And I think as I talk through this presentation, I've got a real reflection on kind of the use of data. That's my job title. I'm the Director for Data Use, but what does data use mean? And I think quite often we use data almost retrospectively, and what the pandemic has shown is that we need to use that data, data for action is what I call it. So I will reflect on that a little bit as I'm through my presentation. So one of the cornerstones of our commitment at DI to the Leave No One Behind agenda is that in order for people to count, you need to count people. So births need to be registered, visits to health facilities need to be recorded, and the progress through schools needs to be monitored. Service delivery itself requires good public administration, which requires good data. And in high income countries, quite often those infrastructures are really taken for granted, but that's not the case in low income countries, particularly in fragile and conflict affected states. At DI, we've really worked with a range of partners across the development data ecosystems, from ministries in charge of government planning and national statistics institutes, all the way through to kind of multilateral agencies, civil society organizations representing specific communities and citizens. And we've really promoted an approach that convenes and brings all of those actors together across the ecosystem. And I think this will be another theme throughout my presentation. And it was highlighted really eloquently by one of my colleagues at the Partnership for Sustainable Development Data in a blog that they posted this week about human interoperability. And quite often in the data community, we talk about interoperability of data systems, but you can't have interoperability of data systems if the people behind those systems aren't talking to each other. And I think there is some real key learning there. But let's think about how our work with these actors over the past 2 years and what we've really learned from our experience in the pandemic. And here I'm going to echo a lot of the points from my previous speaker. And really, I think as a community, it emphasized what we already knew and really brought it into sharp focus. I mean, the demand for data, especially, as we've said before, timely data has never been greater. Data for action not data for evaluation. And the National Statistics Institutes are really at the heart of this crucial system. And I think all of you who've worked in a National Statistics Institute across the globe have seen the demand for statistics really shoot through the roof. The websites of NSIs have seen unprecedented increases in users, and statisticians across the globe, and I think real credit to you, have really risen to the challenge. We've seen kind of faster production of data, more linkage of data, faster analysis than ever before, and you really should take credit to that. But really, the appetite for that real-time data has never been greater. But some of these old problems remain. And that is that those are who are the most vulnerable, at the most risk of marginalization, are still the most likely to be missing from standard official data. And that's not just the case in development data ecosystems as well. Even if you look at data coming out of the UK at the beginning of the pandemic, the statistics on COVID deaths were based on just those who were admitted to hospitals and missed those living in care homes. A huge admission that we knew now, but has now been built into the official statistics and reporting and dashboard. But if you look at what that means for the rest of the world, far too many people's deaths go completely uncounted altogether because robust death registration systems are simply not in place. And in lower income countries, the biggest gap we've seen is a reliance on household surveys. Now, I'm not here to bash household surveys. They are a thing, a perfectly sampled household survey is a thing of beauty. And when they were introduced in many countries in the kind of mid-1980s, they really filled a vacuum, providing that reliable demographic and socioeconomic data that had previously never been available. But they remain dominant to this day as the most widely regarded source of development statistics. However, a combination of sample design and cost means that while they produce great national estimates, surveys can't provide the sufficiently disaggregated data that's going to be of use to local service providers and local government. So what needs to be done to tackle these challenges effectively? And again, I think quite a lot of us already know what needs to be done and are really striving to support these systems. And often the first step is to make the most effective use of the data that's already there. And we've coined a term called mapping the data landscape. And that's really understanding the production structures, the governance, and the demand for data, and creating inventories all in one place so that people know where to go to find information. They know where disaggregated data and information might be available, which surveys are available, which administrative systems have those bits of information on. The second is the production of disaggregated data, and to truly kind of look at the impact on that full population distribution, thinking about intersectionality between identities, and looking to link between data sets, looking at interoperability, both between those data sets and the people behind them as well. But I think one of the biggest problems to tackle here, though, in particular in developing countries, is that assessment of progress is based on these household surveys, but they're quite often inappropriate for obtaining information about the poorest. Typically by design, they admit those living in institutions, those who are mobile or nomadic, some of the kind of most marginalized populations. And in practice, household surveys typically underrepresent those in fragile and disjointed households, slum populations, and areas posing security risks. Now, we know that no data source is perfect, but this means that we need to look beyond those household surveys to really fill those gaps. And there's really a growing consensus among development actors that while surveys have a vital role to play, there is now capacity to think about administrative data systems to provide more comprehensive and more timely data. And we've seen some excellent best practice emerging over the past year, which takes a much more broader look at the data ecosystem. It considers those traditional sources, but also partners outside of the official data production space with the private sector and with communities as well. And it's really important to have both of those. And I would urge you to go onto our website and look at a webinar that we produced a couple of weeks ago now in collaboration with the Ugandan government, where they had a great example where they've used real-time mobile data records alongside traditional household surveys, as well as information directly from community leaders to help target their social protection measures, and a real innovative use of data and statistics and partnerships to really ensure that they're getting to the right people and are supporting the right people during the pandemic. But let me first go back to that kind of understanding the data landscape approach, because I do think it's really important. And I just want to reflect on this quote that's come from the Office of the President in Uganda. It's where development initiatives, we have one of our offices, so where we do a lot of work across the data ecosystem in Uganda. And here they're talking about the disability data ecosystem and the fact that there's no central repository where that information is. There's no assessment of the quality of that data. And actually, most agencies have no way that they can effectively share data or link data. Now, if you've worked in government like I have, you'll know that even within your ministry, it's impossible to know what other departments are doing, let alone thinking outside of your ministry and across the government and what other ministries are doing. So I think this quote will be kind of quite familiar. It certainly was to me as an ex-civil servant. And it really emphasizes that it's not just about the statistical products either, not just about that end product, but it's about the underlying systems, including the censuses, surveys, but also the administrative data, but also about creating those groups where people are convening together to understand. The people who govern those systems come together to understand what value their data might hold for someone else. So as we've been developing this work, we've developed an approach to, like I said, what we call data landscaping, and its scope covers the political economy of data within a country, the structures and standards that govern the collection, production, and sharing of the data, the information systems themselves and the infrastructure, things like the energy and the ITC services, but also the culture that drives the demand for and use of data. And we apply this framework, and we've applied it in a number of settings, both to develop strategic action plans, but also to inform further pieces of work. So we've worked on the disability data landscape within Uganda and are working across with a number of actors to improve both the coherence, robustness, and accessibility of disability data in that situation. But we found some really, really common themes, and here they are. And again, they echo a little bit of what Andre said as well. Traditional surveys can't meet the needs of local government. Administrative systems suffer from poor quality data as their use by local government is limited. Most data gathering at the local level is done for the purpose of upward reporting and not for local use. So we get this vicious cycle of data being collected at a point of service delivery, but not used there. So there's no incentive to improve the quality of that information. And there's no kind of virtuous cycle of data use happening at that level. It's all being extracted out from the local level up for upward reporting. And that's kind of part of the root of some of these problems. So there's a real tendency, like I said, within the development community to focus kind of on the use of data solely from a monitoring and evaluation perspective. And of course, monitoring and evaluation is really, really vital and really important. But this approach overlooks the fact that data is more urgently needed to inform action, something that the pandemic made really, really very clear. So inclusive data systems like the universal registration of births are not just about identifying communities that are potentially being left behind. It's also about empowering those communities via better access to services. So here on this slide, we present the sort of foundations of an administrative system where data are collected and used at the point of service delivery before being aggregated up into national databases, and then the data flowing to those global levels. And we really believe that this is a kind of administrative system that really, really does need strong investment. So what are the next steps? What are my recommendations for you all here today? And I suppose the first one is this commitment to data systems and the importance of data at a country level, with the political commitment supported by funding for foundational data systems. So most governments and donors operate within 3 to 5 year policy and funding cycles and are expecting a return on investment within that period as well. Administrative systems need development cycles that are much longer so that we can incubate and mature them. If we continue to just look in 3 and 5 year cycles, they will remain underfunded, producing poor and generally unusable data in a seemingly perpetual cycle of neglect. But we can break that if we start to think longer term and not so short term with these data systems. These systems need to be supported by data sharing laws and frameworks that protect the privacy of individuals, but allow for the sharing of data responsibly. And digitization is really key to all of this. It makes it easier to produce real-time data and analysis, and for that use to happen at service delivery, but also for the transfer of data to happen back up and flow back up to national aggregated systems. So you get something that's truly locally led, but globally connected. So thank you all. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to leave you with a couple of links, like I said, to the webinar on targeting COVID-19 relief in Uganda, and also to a blog from me on some thoughts on how to develop better data infrastructures. It's been a pleasure to talk to you all, and I'm looking forward to all hearing your questions and the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claudia. Again, also some key insights for us to dissect a bit and discuss in more depth, hopefully later on during the session. Let's move to our third speaker. Our third speaker is Dr. Claire Dennis-Mapa. Dr. Mapa is National Statistician and Civil Registrar General with the Philippine Statistics Authority. He was previously Dean and Professor in Statistics of the School of Statistics at the University of Philippines, Diliman, and he's also had positions in various national and international organizations and projects. Let's turn to Dr. Mapa for his remarks, which I understand have been pre-recorded.
As the Central Statistical Authority of the Philippine government on primary data collection, the Philippine Statistics Authority recognizes its role in evidence-based policy planning and decision-making. At present, the Philippines remains in the state of calamity with a total of 125,378 active COVID-19 cases as of 25th August 2021. Traveling restrictions are still in force, which continue to pose a huge challenge to the statistical operations of the Philippine Statistics Authority. While the Philippine Statistics Authority was authorized to operate despite the community lockdown, the impact of quarantine restrictions was highly evident in the conduct of surveys and enumeration activities. Committed to delivering its mandate, especially at the critical time, the Philippine Statistics Authority implemented innovations, strategies, and measures to overcome the challenges posed by the pandemic. For the 2020 Census of Population and Housing, a whole of government approach was adopted. Intensive coordination was done at the local and national levels to ensure the smooth conduct of census enumeration. In addition, a technology-driven alternative mode of training was adopted. Different online platforms were used for online training, and audiovisual presentations were also prepared as additional learning materials. In consideration of the restrictions related to the pandemic, the Philippine Statistics Authority also provided different modes of census enumeration. The alternative methods to conduct data collections were also used for price, establishment-based, and household-based surveys. To build confidence among census workers and respondents, safety protocols were emphasized in publicity and advocacy materials, in addition to learning, security, and confidentiality protocols. As an offshoot of bilateral discussions, the Philippine Statistics Authority was able to assist the Department of Health through the provision of weekly data on the numbers and causes of deaths, particularly due to COVID-19. The weekly data provided by the Philippine Statistics Authority serve as input to the policy formulation of the national government. It also provided data to estimate the excess deaths in the country. There have been a lot of efforts to utilize big data in support of official statistics. For price collection, in the first part of 2020, the Philippine Statistics Authority started employing web scraping in the compilation of price statistics and indices. Prices of more than 500 commodities in the Consumer Price Index basket are being regularly monitored from selected online stores. These are being analyzed by comparing them with the movement of offline prices. The Philippine Statistics Authority also has an ongoing collaboration with the Advanced Science and Technology Institute of the Department of Science and Technology for the Artificial Intelligence for the Census of Agriculture and Fisheries project. This aims to apply intelligence technologies such as remote sensing and Earth observation data for the conduct of the 2022 Census of Agriculture and Fisheries. Other efforts concerning the use of big data include the measurement of Rural Access Index, which is being analyzed in correlation with the established socioeconomic indicators in the National Demographic and Health Survey, and the enhancement of small area poverty estimates incorporating nighttime lights, a project together with the Asian Development Bank that examines the feasibility of poverty mapping using satellite imagery and associated geospatial data. To address the emerging demands for more disaggregated data, the Philippine Statistics Authority has started in 2021 the compilation of the Provincial Product Accounts, or the PPA, for provinces under 3 of its pilot regions. The Provincial Product Accounts is viewed as a means to strengthen the planning and decision-making of provincial policymakers and stakeholders in crafting more informed economic policies that will complement our gross national product, gross domestic product, at the national and regional level. The vision of the Philippine Statistics Authority is that by 2025, we will be able to institutionalize the provincial product accounts in all provinces of the 17 regions of the country, including our highly urbanized cities. Understanding the need of policymakers for more frequent data, particularly on the labor market to measure the impact of the pandemic, the Philippine Statistics Authority moved towards providing high-frequency statistical information on the Philippine labor market to better understand the current situation and employment, unemployment, and underemployment during this unprecedented time. Starting in 2021, the Philippine Statistics Authority implemented the monthly conduct of the Labor Force Survey, which will generate more frequent information at the national level, while the regular quarterly conduct can generate estimates at the regional level. In keeping with its commitment to provide timely, accurate, and relevant statistics, the Philippine Statistics Authority also has taken steps to introduce improvement in its statistical operations. For the 19th series of the Family Income and Expenditure Survey conducted this year, the Philippine Statistics Authority shifted to a technology-enabled platform called the Computer-Aided Personal Interviewing, or CAPI system. Because of this, the Philippine Statistics Authority will be able to report the first semester 2021 poverty results by the end of the year. Likewise, the Philippine Statistics Authority will also be using for the first time the updated 2020 Philippine Classification of Individual Consumption according to purpose. This is a very timely exercise as it provides important information to determine the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the income and expenditure patterns of Filipino families. Another improvement undertaken this year is the rebasing of the Consumer Price Index to 2018, which aims to provide a more accurate depiction of consumer patterns. The updating of the market basket and our outlets and the data collection for the 2018 base Consumer Price Index was simultaneously done with the 2012 base Consumer Price Index. For the Community-Based Monitoring System, or CBMS, the Philippine Statistics Authority has introduced the use of computer-aided web interview, or the CAWI system, as one of its modes for data collection for this August to September 2021 round. The CBMS will establish database at the city and municipal level as well as at the national level. This will also generate relevant statistics at the national level that will complement the local level data. The Philippine Statistics Authority feels that the CBMS is a potential game changer in data reporting, particularly in identifying and measuring the specific needs of the most marginalized in our country. In addition to serving as a central statistical authority of the country, the Philippine Statistics Authority is also mandated to carry out and enforce and administer civil registration functions. To provide convenient payment alternatives to our clients during the pandemic, the Philippine Statistics Authority strengthened its online payment platform and its digital payment system through partnership with PayMaya Philippines. This undertaking ensures the public that we will continue to adopt measures necessary to facilitate contactless and cashless transaction for our civil registry documents amidst the pandemic. As part of our mandate to deliver inclusive identification system, the Philippine Statistics Authority has ramped up the operations of the Philippine Identification System, or PhilSys, despite the pandemic. The PhilSys aims to provide a valid proof of identification to Filipinos and resident aliens, and this is envisioned to transform how services are delivered and accessed in the country by making public and private transactions seamless, safe, and efficient. The Philippine Statistics Authority is set to launch the PhilSys Mobile ID, an alternative version of the physical ID card, within the year 2021. During the pandemic, the Philippine Statistics Authority continued to innovate, embrace the use of technology on its data collection efforts and reporting, and at the same time engage stakeholders and policymakers through its official data releases. While more work is needed, the Philippine Statistics Authority is optimistic and will continue to pursue more initiatives to ensure that it remains responsive to emerging demands and can cope with the ever-changing data landscape. Again, this is Dennis Mapa, National Statistician and Civil Registrar of the Philippine Statistics Authority. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much to Dr. Mapa for those inspiring remarks and a great overview of the modernization agenda happening in the Philippines. Let's move on to our fourth speaker. We're very lucky to be joined by Dr. Kun-Kwan Ryu. Dr. Ryu is Commissioner of Statistics Korea. Prior to his appointment, he taught economics and statistics at Seoul National University, and he's also worked as a visiting professor at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, Osaka University, and Stanford University, among elsewhere. Let us turn to Dr. Ryu for his remarks.
Thank you. First of all, as a co-host of this conference, I very much appreciate all the participants, particularly in this session. I appreciate Craig for moderating this session, and I very much enjoyed the presentations by Andre, Claudia, and Dennis, and I'm very much looking forward to other presentations after me. Initially, I was supposed to attend a meeting at the Korean National Assembly, which I have no other option but to attend. So last week I videotaped my presentation. So not to waste that videotape, I will use that video clip, and then later on, I'll address any questions by real me in real time. Please understand. Thank you. Hello, I will talk on the issue of building a more responsive national statistical system using the case of Korea. Statistics Korea, so-called COSTAT, prepares for the rapid shift in statistical landscape. Administered data are being more and more heavily used, and at the same time, private digital big data are increasingly used as well. We are preparing for these changes in statistical environments, and also to prepare for those changes, we are building K-statistics system, so-called. K-statistics system will enable public data within the national statistical system to be safely stored, linked, and combined to meet increasing public needs. The basic idea goes as follows. We encrypt high-quality data and separately store them, and then safely link these encrypted data through statistical registers. And then later on, as time goes by, and as also technology permits us, we'd like to link these official data even with private sector big data. The K-statistics system can be explained using the following diagram. On the left-hand side, we have data suppliers, so-called provider. And on the right-hand side, we are data demand side, so-called user. The provider provides data in encrypted form, while the user requests data usage. Basically, computation of some summary statistics. And then we calculate summary statistics and other statistics based on encrypted data without decrypting them. And then the encrypted results will be sent to user. At this stage, the user cannot see or cannot reveal any private information because even the results are encrypted. Only after user asked the trusted third party for decoding, the user can see the results. From data privacy and security, this scheme is quite safe in the sense that only at the time that the trusted third party decode the results, he or she can see the results. So the trusted third party, after checking the results, only when the results doesn't reveal any individual or sensitive privacy-related issues, he or she can send the results back to the user. So this is the basic K-statistics system. Second, we will heavily use big data in official statistics. During COVID-19 pandemic period, we use mobile big data. And then by using mobile big data, we computed time series of daily population movements. And then we provide this information to other governmental departments and public institutions such that they can monitor and study whether population movements are somehow related with the spread of COVID disease in Korea. Also, during certain period of pandemic, initially at an early stage, face masks and hand sanitizers, the prices of them have been skyrocketing. And we monitored the price movements of these sensitive items on a daily basis. Regarding the use of big data in official statistics, we are currently building an Nowcast portal. As we all know, official statistics are sometimes lagging heavily behind in time. Therefore, we are in need for developing short-term business indicators and socio-economic indicators on households, individuals, businesses, and other employment status as well. So we will provide near real-time data by using data collected from private sectors at a higher frequency. These institutions include financial institutions, telephony companies, online recruitment information providers, and so on. So we are currently building Nowcast portal. Third, we will heavily use statistical registers. So as a national data steward, we have in mind that using airline business model, so-called hub and spoke model. So we want to be data hub of official statistics, and then we will link different institutions and different data sources as a hub and spoke model. Therefore, we can more efficiently collect data, more efficiently use existing data, I think. So for example, using statistical registers, we were even efficiently conduct national surveys. Last year, we conducted a population census amid COVID-19 very successfully by heavily relying on statistical registers. Field surveys were done only on 20% of total population. So there's a huge increase in data production efficiency. We just finished the economic census this year. Again, we heavily used statistical business registers. The entire population of establishments, businesses in Korea is more than 6 million, out of which we conducted about half of them, about 3.4 million businesses. And the response rate were more than 99%. Believe me, more than 99%. So we were quite successfully conducted 2 big censuses last year and this year by heavily using statistical registers. By heavily using statistical registers, COSTAT strengthens the foundation for administrative database statistical production. For example, we improved the statistical business register and the statistical economic activity register. Also, we developed the statistical child household register and the statistical immigrant and non-permanent resident register. Also, we are currently developing an integrated socioeconomic indicators. By doing that, we can provide better data to governmental agencies for evidence-based policymaking. A fully developed case statistics will enable us to link many different data sources such that we can build an overall picture for each policy and for each topic. Let me elaborate on 3 cases. So first case is the overall picture for retirement pension. So there are many different pension sources. For example, occupation pension, retirement pension, personal pension, basic pension, reverse mortgage, and farmland pension. By using statistical registers and also by using household registers, we can combine all these different sources of pension for each individual, also for each household. By doing that, we can better understand how retired people are making living. And by doing that, we can identify, for example, those people whose income sources are not sufficient. So that's the first case. The second case is by combining information on education, childcare allowances, public assistance, childcare expenses, and the experience of abuse, we can develop overall data for each child living in Korea. And then this overall picture will guide policy makers to design a better policy for each child living in Korea. The third example is developing integrated social economic indicators by combining income, education, employment, and other variables. Again, we have to rely on using statistical registers as a vehicle to link different data sources. I very much appreciate giving me a chance to present what we, COSTAT, is doing currently. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ryu, for your remarks, for making yourself available for the Q&A in a few minutes, but also for acting as co-host for this important event. Our fifth and final speaker is Dr. Angela May. Dr. May is the chief of the research branch at the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, that's UNODC, where she oversees global, regional, and national research in the areas of drugs and crime. She's responsible for several global reference research publications, including the World Drug Report, the Global Report on Trafficking Persons, and the Global Study on Homicide, among others. Let us turn to Dr. May for her remarks.
Thank you, Greg. And well, good morning, good afternoon, and good night for those that are in the same time zone as me in Vienna. Thank you for hosting me, and thank you to all that spoke before me for the interesting points made. And thank you particularly to COSTAT to host them. And just wanted to acknowledge the great partnership that we have together on with our Center of Excellence that is hosted by COSTAT and is a center that tries to support the countries in the region to improve crime and criminal justice statistics. So I'm here speaking with two hats. One, as you say, the head of research in the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, but also as a co-chair of the chief statisticians in international organization. And so I will speak and present the perspective from the international statistical system. And so, as I said, not only presenting what we do in our organization, but also hopefully presenting well also what my colleagues have done during the crisis and how other international organizations and other international statistical systems have reacted and how we addressed and responded to the crisis together as an international statistical system. So let me share my slides. And I hope you can see. So I hope that you can see the slides. While I was preparing this presentation, I was thinking, what else can I tell you? And indeed, hearing my predecessor, those that spoke before me, and also hearing also many others' intervention during the conferences, I think it's hard to say something new. So what I thought, maybe I will start by saying, just directly answering the questions, what are the lessons learned out of this crisis? And
sorry for
to do this,
Angela.
Sorry?
Sorry for the interruption. We can't see the slide. We can see your presentation. Do you want to try one more time? I can't.
Okay, I can see it in my screen, but okay. Do you?
Now it's up.
Okay.
So, can you make it a full screen? Yeah, it's everything is good now.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, apology. I must have pressed the wrong button. So let me start by saying, okay, maybe to go back where we were at the beginning and the feeling that I think we all had around March where the world started to be completely different. And I'm sure that all of us in this panel, but in general, everyone dealing with knowledge information system, felt that, we didn't have the means or, all the things that we had in the pipeline. For example, here in UNODC, we were releasing some of information about wildlife trafficking. We were working on trafficking of drugs or drugs use, etc. It sounds like almost embarrassing presenting at that time something that we were working because did not represent what was happening. And for how much we could have prepared with innovative approaches, etc. I think the crisis left us all with a sense of what do we do, and at least here I'm speaking more from my organization. We quickly reflected and say, well, saying that we don't know is not an option, and what we felt is to say, imagine how the doctors in the hospital were feeling, where they didn't know the right answer, the perfect answer, because this was something new. And so what they were trying was to try, even if knowing that behind there was not a solid research that could say that the treatment they were trying on patients was the right one. And at the same time, we felt we had to have some urgency and say, even if we know we can't provide the perfect answer, because we don't have the means now. What is the quick, probably the idea of quick and dirty, that at least we can say something. And as I'm sure everyone felt the pressure of all the users asking, what is the situation? What are you saying that is happening in the field? And again, for us was, for example, for crime and drugs. So I think the first lesson that I would say was the importance to find the right balance between the quick and the dirty. So how dirty it could be. And I think on this trial basis, at least I have seen that, at least for us as an organization, certain things I think worked well, and they were quick and good enough to drive some conversation at the international level on, the response, for example, of drugs and crime. Other things were too quick. And I think, and I want to bring the example of violence against women, because what happened right after the pandemic, everybody starting to say that because everybody was at home, then domestic violence was increasing. And since all our data collection system, particularly on violence against women, is based on number of women that experience the violence, frankly, when we started looking into the data, the few data that we had, clearly based more on reporting crime rather than self-reporting from women, we couldn't see that surge. Looking at hotlines, women or for children, there were mixed results. But there was that push to prove in a way that violence had increased. And what we see now, emerging now with the data that we have, is that probably what happened is that what suddenly increased after the crisis was the frequency, more than, all of a sudden, more women exposed. And probably the exposure and the increase on the number of women, we see it now because the crisis has created more and more environments where indeed women were increased. But it's not that this environment were created right away. And so it's not that after a month after the restrictive measure of COVID happened, we could have seen the sudden increase in the number of women. But what we have seen a sudden increase after the crisis was the increase of frequency. And so where women that were already in weak and difficult circumstances, what happened is that the violence became stronger. And that, show us that our systems were not adequate because all our systems were just based on counting women, not the number of events or again, the level of violence. then the other lesson learned is that even if, yes, we needed to respond quickly, and knowing that that would not have been perfect and at the same quality of things that we had been producing before, it's important that then we just don't lose also the perspective of keeping solid national statistics, in our cases, the international statistical system. And so to continue to build, because after the crisis, and as we are now, in a way, that's the new normal. And the new normal then is to go back, to continue to build on that and not deviate too much into other, if you want, quick and dirty solution. And then, I mean, the third definitely is that the crisis has triggered clearly innovation. And I think all presentation before me show that how much at national level, and I have to say, and I want to show you later, at international level, indeed, this has triggered innovation. But I think we need to be conscious that this is not, not to make us feel that now we have all the answer for all crises. Probably the next crisis will be very different. And again, we will find ourselves on something that we say, oh, but what we have developed on the previous crisis may not be what we will need for the next crisis. So, and so I think that the innovation that we have seen now, and hopefully will become in the mainstreaming in the, in continuing international and national statistical system, we have to be conscious that probably the next crisis we will still have to think and to trigger different innovation. So here I just wanted to start by showing some of the again type of innovation that we have done at international level, and I start from what we have done in UNODC. I was listening to Andre when he was describing how Statistics Canada was in a way ready because it was going, it's already gone into the modernization phase. And I was thinking, well, probably we were not as ready as Statistics Canada. But we had started, we were lucky in a way that one of the things that we were developing was a system, a web scraping. I heard also the Philippines use similar strategies. We had a system that we were creating to quickly have real-time information to monitor drug trafficking. So to understand through seizures where there were different routes, traffickers change quickly, modes of operandi, etc. And so what we did, we used that system and change it to target something that was emerging as a major issue, and was the trafficking of falsified medical products. And that again, we saw emerging quickly. But also more than just saying, okay, what and where, we wanted to understand the dynamics. And clearly we saw that during the pandemic, the supply and demand and the gap that at the beginning we all had in not meeting the huge demand that all of a sudden started to meet the demand for COVID-related medical products, how that triggered quickly a lot of trafficking and new crime. And so through that real-time information system that we had and through web scraping, we were able to map and understand the dynamics of this trafficking. So again, to alert, and we were able quite early in the pandemic to alert the international community, for example, on the possibility of having the trafficking of falsified vaccines, something that we see today. And the other thing that we saw that we were going on, but during the crisis, we suddenly realized that we needed to do more was to look at the darknet. So from the more, as I said, our international statistical system, again, also what really triggered something that we had not done before. And we have developed, as you can see here, 3 volumes on explaining how the world was changing with statistical data. And just to tell you, as a group of international statisticians, we had never produced something like this. But again, the COVID really make us show us quickly that we needed to explain the world in a different way, and to make sure that again we show also the value and the relevance of international statistics at a time where there was such a big appetite for statistics on how things were changing quickly. So what are the strategy that were adopted by different agencies? And here I think you will hear something that you have also done at national level, I've seen. But let me just go through maybe quickly again to these different approaches, and different agencies again build on what they were doing and took different approaches. So in this throughout these 3 volumes, you can see, for example, some agencies went to nowcasting. And some of these graphs related to the first volume. So we're talking about now a year ago, more than a year ago. But again, quickly, for example, to see how the aviation industry that all of a sudden completely changed, and then how ICAO really tried to see and nowcast and to understand what was happening at that time. And the same also UNIDO, that already had in place nowcasting techniques, and so use it to really see what was happening almost in real time. Others agency, what they did, they use existing data to try to say, okay, what does the existing data based on past experience can help us to understand or to face the crisis, and see that, for example, WTO showed how the tariff in trading medical products were particularly high, and then could hamper the trade of something that was so important, particularly at the beginning of a pandemic, again, because of a shortage, etc. And so to highlight how the tariff could also, could have been an impediment on facilitating the trade that at that time was so much needed. But also, for example, OECD looking on how the COVID-19 was impacting the vulnerable, and looking at the existing data to see how existing inequality could have an impact. And so the importance of looking at that existing inequality also during the pandemic. Other agency just went to present different scenarios. And so again, you see, for example, here what WTO did for tourism to understand again what may have happened depending on how long the pandemic and on how restrictions were applied in different countries. Or like the World Bank. And again, here I'm talking about volume 1. And then I think the World Bank, as all the other agencies, when time passed and when more data had become available, refine also some of the information. But that's where I think the quick and dirty that I was discussing early comes, and see again on how we all try and then over time adjust it to try to give more and more better information. Then, others use real-time information. Again, here is the example from us, where I was saying we could use this web scraping that we were anyway using to monitor drug trafficking, but also our UNESCO, was able early time to estimate and really alert the world, saying that 1.6 billion learners were out of school during the first phase of the pandemic. Others also did prediction. And so, for example, you see here UNCTAD predicting the drop in foreign direct investment that in 2020 and 2021. And then also UNICEF predicting how the children were affected by the crisis in terms of monitoring poverty. Some agencies were able to mobilize new data collection quickly. And this is the example of the UN Women that quickly went through different regions to understand how the COVID impacted the different work of women and men, and in terms of paid and unpaid work. And so and basically clearly seeing that the data show how particularly the unpaid work and the caring of work at home was definitely a burden more for women than for men. But you know, as international agencies, in a way, we have two roles. One is to provide knowledge, data, to help the international community to address major issues. And so to be, if you want, the National Statistical Office of the world on the different thematic area. But we also have a role in supporting national statistical offices. So the other things that we did as a system was to quickly understand what was the situation, how countries were coping, and how we had to adjust our system to the countries. And so here in this volume, so you also see what was done in terms of scanning the new capacity needs of countries. And so seeing, for example, the impact on civil registration or the impact on the census, or on how agencies like the Economic Commission for Africa or UNSD and UNFPA look at the impact of the COVID in, you know, on the census. So with that, I thank you for listening. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much, Angela. Again, a lot to digest, and sadly, not as much time as we had hoped to digest it. I just would quickly like to say, thank you very much to our speakers. We really do have just a few minutes left within our session. We have a hard stop in 3 or 4 minutes. What this does do is provide us to just come back very briefly to each speaker for about 30 seconds each if possible. And I just would like to ask if you could leave us with a final thought before we wrap. Could you take 30 seconds to share, let's say, a surprising lesson, something you didn't expect that you could share when it comes to strengthening the resilience of data and systems? What should new entrants watch out for? What should NSOs that have struggled to adapt to the pandemic and other crises watch out for, and what should they do differently? Let me go back to the top and ask Andre to get us started.
Eating into the time because I'm muted. Sorry about that. I'll reiterate the points I made earlier. I think the one thing, data sharing and collaboration is key. NSOs can't do everything by themselves, and we need to recognize that. Second thing is the importance of standards as the foundation for everything that we do. Everything needs to be classified and organized. And if we all use common standards, then we make, certainly we can make progress there. And the other part of it is innovation. We heard all the presentations today talking about new techniques, machine learning, web scraping, and so on. I think we need to embrace those to really move the yardsticks forward. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Claudia.
Thank you. It's been such a fascinating session, but I think for me, my key point would be back on that investment in foundational data systems and the need to really break this 2, 3 to 5 year funding cycle, look beyond and look long term, because while NSOs will need to innovate to meet the next crisis, you can't innovate on the basis without the foundations there. So I just think that those are so vital. And that we need to look beyond and see how that we can really invest in these systems so that we're not reliant on big household surveys that are funded externally, and we really get nationally owned data systems to complement those national surveys.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Dr. Mapa is not with us now, so we'll go to Dr. Ryu.
Okay, if you imagine big data as a big spreadsheet, there are columns and rows. Without trust and without technology protecting privacy, the rows will not be expanded. At the same time, different aspects, so different columns would not be linked. So the core Statistics Korea is heavily working on improving privacy preserving technologies. I think there is a complementarity between laws and technology. Law alone wouldn't convince people to donate their data, even to governmental agencies. So we have to supplement the law with adequate technologies. That's what we are currently working on. And I very much enjoyed all the presentations today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ryu. And Angela, the last word.
I would say the importance of listening to what is needed and what is and when is needed, and to recognize and to have in a way also the courage to try different solution, but maintaining always the transparency, acknowledging when we know we are not providing the best solution we can, but the best that fits what is needed. And particularly, as I said, when is needed.
And well, thank you very much. And with that, let me thank our distinguished panelists. I want to thank our hosts again. And again, we want to thank you for joining us today. Please do stay tuned for the roundtable discussion, which is coming up next. And a wonderful conference to you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Let me thank Mr. Hammer and the panelists for this great session, allowing us to share many high-level insights. Carrying forward, we have the roundtable discussion, but first, if you registered at the conference and are joining us through a live streaming in our official conference website, you can choose either Korean or English channel using the live streaming menu option. Also, anyone joining us through our official conference website can participate in Q&A and discussion by leaving their questions and comments in the comment section located in the website under the live streaming tab. The website also provides detailed information for this conference, including its program, biography of speakers, and presentation materials for downloading. With that, let me invite you to roundtable discussion, chaired by Mr. Rikke Munch-Hansen, who manages ASCAP's work on economic and environment statistics and is currently in charge of the statistics division of ASCAP. Ms. Hansen has worked to advance sustainable development in Asia and the Pacific during the past 2 decades, focusing on energy evaluation and statistics. She has facilitated numerous discussions on transformative changes to national statistical systems as secretary to the ASCAP Committee on Statistics, co-chair of the IAEG on disaster-related statistics, and in many other capacities. With that, let me invite Ms. Hansen to the stage.
Good morning from Thailand and from ESCAP to this roundtable, one of the final discussions of this international conference on statistics. And it is my pleasure to moderate the discussions over the next hour or so, where we will be looking at the role of data and statistics in understanding and mitigating risks. And we will talk about what we've already learned from the ongoing pandemic, what we've learned from previous crises, and try to look at this and also think about what we've already heard during this conference in other sessions to see if we can extract some main messages for national statistical institutions and global institutions also working on statistics and data for development. And what we'll be looking at particularly are messages, lessons, recommendations that has to do with business continuity, data integration, operational integration, and with the view to really improving our preparedness for future crises. So this is the heading of this session. And knowing that the global pandemic is still going strong in many places of the world, including where I'm based in Southeast Asia, where the pandemic is really at its highest so far, we of course are not in a position yet to fully look back. But nevertheless, it's already been a pandemic that has been going on for 1.5 years. So there should be ample opportunity already now to take stock to some extent. And we also see that the heading is very much the pandemic, but along the way we hear about disasters. So the issue of preparedness is really front and center. And I'm thinking here, of course, not least of the recent events in Haiti. So it's just a reminder to all of us that disasters, they take different shapes and sizes, and they do strike different places, different parts of the globe at different times. But the issue of being prepared, being able to respond, also when it comes to the needs for data and statistics to help decision makers put together the best kind of policies that are risk informed, the best responses when disasters occur, it is really our business to do so. So this is what the panel and this roundtable really want to try to get our heads around. And I'm very happy that I have 4 excellent panelists lined up here to help us all get through this thinking exercise and maybe concluding exercise as well. You will see that you have long bios of each panelist already available on the conference website, and a few of the panelists have been speaking in other sessions. So I will simply introduce our panelists just by their name and the title. We have Mr. Juan Daniel Oviedo Arango, who is the Director General of the Department of Statistics in Colombia, and this is an organization many of us know best by the acronym DANE, which is also very present and seen in Juan's background here for our discussion today. We also have Mr. Rolando Ocampo, who is the Director of the Statistics Division in the UN Regional Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. So this is my brother in my sister regional commission. So ECLAC and ESCAP enjoy a lot of good collaboration. Welcome to you, Rolando. We have Ms. Jenna Slotin, who is the Director of Policy for the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. Welcome to you, Jenna, great to have you. We have Ms. Francesca Pierucci, who is the Assistant Director from the United Nations Statistics Division in DESA. Francesca, welcome, good to see you. So what we do have here is a panel that really comprises of people who are experienced and work at the national, at the regional, and the global level. So I think the scene is set for getting a lot of good and different perspectives on the question we have at hand for this roundtable. Briefly on what we are going to do over the next 60, 70 minutes is that I'll take our panelists through 4 rounds of questions. We will have a bit of an intermezzo where there will be opportunity for the panelists to answer questions from the audience. So this is my cue to strongly encouraging those of you who listen in to be active and ask questions, because this is really what will help us and will help the panelists get to deeper levels of thinking and get some really useful results out of this roundtable. So please don't be shy, put in your questions, and I'll do my best to pass them on to one or more panelists so we can all benefit from their insights. So I think it's time to start. We will have 4 rounds of questions to our 4 panelists. And the first round is really a warm-up round so that you can all get going, and you can also get used to the time taking that I'm trying to manage here. as the moderator, because this is also a quick round. And what I will ask each of you is to limit yourself to 2 minutes. And what I will ask you is thinking of what you've seen and heard and learned during the pandemic in terms of timely data, innovation to ensure business continuity, etc. What would you put forward as the 2 most important lessons learned or examples of innovation that have occurred during the pandemic, which is something that we really should take note on and build on as we move forward? And I'll call on you in the same order that I just introduced you. So Juan Daniel first, then Rolando, then Jenna, and then Francesca. So Juan Daniel, you have the honor of starting. So 2 minutes for your reflections on the key lessons. You have the floor, Juan Daniel.
Thank you very much, Vicky. You got me a bit stressed because of this enormous responsibility of starting this conversation, but something that I wanted to highlight as a tremendous learning from the pandemic is that capacity building enabled by the international statistical community, I believe that is an essential facility for the resilience and the responsiveness that we national statistics officers and the heads of the national statistics systems we have currently and that we have performed during the pandemic. So I think that this is a very important asset, that it's not only a platform for capacity building that has become in a very, very fast way as an innovation lab, as an innovation platform in order to develop new techniques or new approaches of grasping information or integrating information. And the second learning, something which is from the prospective way, is that we national statistics officers, we are mandated to the data stewardship role, something that has been discussed in the last years as an opportunity to be fit for purpose, became essential for the future in our role in national statistics systems, because we need to develop capabilities to listen to our stakeholders and at the same time to provide some responses to increasing data demands that we foresee in our data ecosystem. So that's mainly the 2 main lessons that we have learned, and the opportunities also of keeping us together in the future in the international statistical community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juan Daniel. And you are really leading the way here because your intervention was exactly 2 minutes. So well done to that. And these innovations in capacity building is something that I've definitely also noticed that this is a good thing to take with us going forward. The data stewardship role, it's becoming more and more central to operations of statistical organizations. So thank you so much for sharing those lessons. Let's move on to our next speaker, Rolando. Let's see if you can do as well on timekeeping, and of course also on the contents. You have the floor, Rolando.
Thank you, Rike, and good day to all of you in Asia and the Pacific. Well, I think the 2 ones that I want to mention is the first one is that we saw in our region, in Latin America and the Caribbean, so the development of portals for visualization and monitoring what was going on during the pandemic and the COVID, and that is an important issue because that means that countries have the coordination in between the geospatial offices and the statistical offices to create this information and use all the techniques that was able to do in this regard. And the other thing, the second issue that I want to mention is that in our region, in ECLAC, and talking about the regional office of the United Nations, so the work that we have done and the innovation that we create is this new way of coordinating through webinars. So we will discover that webinars and the technology allows us to be connected and continuously be together, working aligned, using these webinars to implement the new technologies that we have to adopt. For example, the change to telephonic survey to adopt and try to incorporate, to use and take the information from the household surveys, and of course all the consumer price indices that we needed this new technology. But the most important is that we were able, as Juan Daniel mentioned, to coordinate ourselves through webinars, and they work, and they were a very good tool for the next and for the continuity of this project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rolando. And what you're just saying there is definitely echoing also from my end as being a regional commission with similar responsibilities, that this connectivity is something that has, the benefits of it has become so obvious during this pandemic. And the other point you mentioned, that the advances in data communication and visualization also is something that enabled all of us to actually see what was happening. We are moving fast beyond the traditional statistical table also. Rolando, thank you so much for sharing the insights. And let's move on to Jenna. Jenna, you have the floor.
Thanks, Rique. I want to reflect on a little bit of what I heard in session 5A, which I was moderating yesterday. My first lesson to share is around how Anir Chowdhury from the government of Bangladesh, from a unit called A2I, which uses technology to promote development, was sharing how they just dramatically expanded the horizon of possibility. And there was an immense amount of innovation and creativity just to get the job done. And he was describing how they really had in Bangladesh no statistics to rely on when they started the effort to track illness, hospitalization, et cetera. And he was describing the many different ways in which they pulled data from a whole range of sources, at clinics, from mortality, from testing when it was up and running. And they were just working across so many institutions and agencies, including at local, very local levels. And the creativity that went into imagining what would be a data source we would pull in, how will we do it? So it's that integration point, even before we get to, but eventually got to those great visualizations and the platforms that Rolando was talking about, and how incredibly valuable those were. And so one of the things he was saying was just that expanding that horizon of possibility. From some of our own work, my second reflection comes from some of our own work in the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. And that's around the spirit of collaboration and partnership, which is fairly typical in a crisis, right? People band together, but we really saw it in the data community and in different actors working together. So it's not a question of saying no, but saying, how do we do that? Anir Chowdhury again described how he was basically on a WhatsApp group with the 4 telcos, himself, the regulator, figuring out how to pull data together for mobility, et cetera. In Kenya, our partners formed what they called a food security war room. And they just pooled everything they had to figure out where food was, where it was moving, and to make sure that people weren't going hungry. So that spirit of collaboration is one that I would take away. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I think you're pointing also to issues of let's say the culture of organizations here, that you're looking at being able to actually see new opportunities, which brings a lot of enthusiasm with it. And as you say, also one of the ways that's demonstrated is this increased willingness and sense of necessity of actually partnering up also with people we may not have worked with together. So Janet, thank you so much for sharing. Francesca, over to you.
Thank you, Rike, and great to hear from the other colleagues. Very inspiring reflections, and good day, everybody, to our listeners. My number one lesson, I think I'd like to talk about the value of data. There's been an increasing attention and public interest in data since the pandemic started. To understand the pandemic, to compare across different population groups, regions, countries, and both the public and the policymakers, I think, have seen increasingly data as indispensable to feel protected, to move forward, to implement interventions. So I think the number one lesson is that we learned and we confirmed how critically important it is that there is an understanding by the public and by the policymakers of the value of data. And that is what has allowed NSOs, I think, to dare more, to play a bigger role, and to work across the system to an extent that they hadn't been able to do before. I think this is one key lesson that we have to build on, but the challenge is to retain this interest. People should expect that all decisions affecting their health, their lives, their well-being are always based on timely, disaggregated and quality of data. So it's key that people continue to demand data, which creates the incentives for investments in the production and use of data for decision making. But it is up to us, our community, I think, to demonstrate the impact and the value of data. As I like very much how Professor Anim put it during his keynote address, proving the consequences of not using data. The second lesson I'd like to mention, the second reflection I'd like to make is about those countries that were more successful. From what we've seen with our work, the countries that were more successful in moving swiftly to this alternative new mode were those that already had sufficient flexibility and the necessary framework for the National Statistical Office to engage with the other parts of the data system. So both within the official statistical system and the private sector. So it was easier for them to resort to the new data tools, to the new solutions. And in particular, of course, the close collaboration with health systems in this case because of the pandemic. And also where the ICT infrastructure for staff to work effectively were already in place. I'll stop here. I hope I stayed within the 2 minutes.
Almost, Francesca, almost. You all did very well. Thank you, Francesca, for sharing this. And what you mentioned just reminded me also of another presentation in a session yesterday in terms of this value of statistics, where several countries across the world have found that in terms of lockdown measures, statistics operations have not been considered critical functions and therefore have been hit very hard. And this, of course, has to do with what you mentioned in terms of, well, how does the rest of society actually look upon statistical operations in the sense of necessity and importance also during disaster situations? And maybe this is something that really we should take note of, so that the necessary measures are taken in terms of preparedness for future crises as well. So thank you so much, all of you, for reflecting on this first question. And I hope you are all warm now so that we are ready for a second round of questions. And I will start again with you, Juan Daniel. And because you are the panelist in this roundtable that is heading a national statistics office, I'm directing this question to you. We know that there were serious disruptions in regular operations in all statistical offices around the world. I'd like you to reflect on how these disruptions have impacted the overall statistical system in Colombia, and whether any of the changes you may have put in place is something that you already now know that you will integrate into the future work of your office. And Juan Daniel, you have 4 minutes for this reflection.
Thank you very much, Ricky, for the opportunity of sharing that, of giving us the opportunity to share about what has happened and what is going to be, let's say, a prospective attitude towards the national statistics system. Something that probably could be a bit philosophical, but the main issue that happened in the National Statistics Office of Colombia is that we started to raise ourselves important questions, as for example, how do we know that we are going to accomplish our mission during the pandemic? Yeah, we know that in a very fast way, our government set some sanitary measures, lockdowns. We had to raise our hands to say we are essential facilities, so we need a special treatment for mobility and several issues that were considering the Colombian government, something that we are very thankful. But we started to say, how are we going to be sure that we are doing our right function during the pandemic? And that was tremendously essential, because this started to approach ourselves to an institutional research way of using data ourselves in order to measure how are we going to be effective in implementing innovation, for example, in the collection of information with telephone supported platforms, because we, in the social perspective of our statistics, we use an in-person based survey framework. And this innovation was very important because this started to set how important is to think ourselves as an organization that connects with the data ecosystems that we have in our country. And that was tremendously important because in Colombia, currently, we are thinking about how the institutional effectiveness of the national statistics system could be approached with the integration of quality assurance frameworks and risk assessment frameworks for the statistical production in the case of official statistics. And rapidly, we started to see in a hands-on approach how data is limitless, and at the same time, that technology is currently a very smart and sharp tool in order to integrate alternative sources of information. So in the answer of this, how do we know that we are accomplishing our mission? It was very important because this risk of not accomplishing of our objectives accelerated or became a catalyzing factor in order to go faster in the integration of alternative sources of information. For example, administrative records, something that had been very sticky in the Colombian case in the former years previous to the pandemic. But in a very fast way, we were able to align with line ministries, with the private sector, as Francesco was mentioning, in order to complement and to provide contrast to the new methods of surveys in the social perspective in the statistical production in Colombia. So what is going to become a permanent mission in the national statistics system of Colombia is how are we going to accelerate the integration of alternative sources of information, but at the same time, how are we going to take advantage of our keystone, which is the fundamental principles of official statistics. This was tremendously important because This allowed us to feel sure that we were able to innovate without violating a set of principles which are very clear and which are very sharp in the soundness and the fit for purpose of official statistics in our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Juan Daniel. And I'm very impressed with the, let's say, strategic outlook that your response really demonstrates, and being able to actually review and revisit statistical operations during such a difficult period with that kind of outlook impresses me deeply. And I took a particular note also on this issue of looking at institutional effectiveness and operational continuity within the context both of the quality assurance framework, which is familiar to most of us, but also looking at a risk assessment framework in that context. And this is something I think I'm going to invite you to speak at one of our Asia Pacific convening forums on this particular topic, because it's something that comes up in a lot of discussions, and I think this would really attract some attention from the chief statisticians in particular, also in Asia and the Pacific. So thank you so much, Juan Daniel. And I will now move to your regional counterpart, to Rolando. And Rolando, you touched upon already in the first two messages or important lessons that you gave us. This issue of integration of geospatial and statistical information. And in the rest of the world, we are looking very much to your region when it comes to institutional settings, for this kind of for this kind of integration, because there is quite a few world-renowned statistical offices that manages to house this under the same roof. And what I'd like you to do is to share some key experiences you've had in working with countries on integrated data, and talk a little bit about how ESCAP supports this kind of integration. And Rolando, I'll give you 4 minutes as well, please. Thank you.
Thank you. First, let me tell you that one of the main issues that we wanted in ECLAC since 2017 is what was to integrate the geospatial information into the statistical information, and that's why the ECLAC decides to incorporate a regional advisor in geospatial information inside the statistics division. Taking account in this process, because we wanted to work with this project to create to give the continuity in terms of to incorporate the geostatistical framework, the geospatial and statistical framework that was adopted by the Statistics Commission and UNGGIM. So we began to work in ECLAC to incorporate this process with the statistical offices in this regard. And in addition, we began to give some capacity building and technical assistance from the geospatial side with the statistical offices in our region. It is in this regard, so we have been working through the Statistical Conference of the Americas, trying to incorporate year by year in our executive committee meetings and during the meeting also to incorporate this important tool and this important coordination within the countries. We have in 2019 in the session of the Statistical Conference of the Americas, we have a joint meeting with UNGGIM and the Statistical Conference of the Americas to incorporate this process. In this regard, so we ask for some funding from the European Union and from the development the development accounts that UN has, gives for development, a project to create geoportals in the statistical offices. So in Latin America, in the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. And now we began in April, and now we have the coordination with at least 7 countries, and we began this process because we think that it's very important to incorporate this kind of coordination. So in this project, this facility, this project, so we took in one country the statistical offices and the geospatial office in the country, and we tried to and we asked them to work together through a timetable that they have to do to produce this project. I think this is an important issue and an important aspect. And of course, so the coordination that we have with some other regions, in particular with ESCAP, Enrique, because we are working in this regard, in this process, but not only this one, because we are working in trying to incorporate through the Sustainable Development Goals, taking all the developments, technical platforms that they have, for example, the one that you have in ESCAP, Enrique, to try to adopt it to our region. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rolando. And I think it's just a good point in time for me to express my thanks to you and your team also for excellent collaboration. You know, in particular, actually, I think it's been one of the positives coming out of the pandemic that it is easier actually for collaboration when we are not all looking around for budget to travel, but thinking, okay, maybe we can have an MS Teams call. And I think that's maybe one of the things we should also take with us and make sure we continue also going forward. And Rolando, I just want to highlight a few of the things you said here in terms of supports from regional organizations, and this goes for global organizations as well. This idea of continuity in the support, which also requires resources. I think it's just a very important point to make. And another thing, the institutional collaboration, where this is one of the things where at the national level, we see the institutional collaboration being a major barrier and being present from an international or regional organization is something that actually has quite some power in pooling different institutions into the same room. Very often we see statistical offices actually not having the convening power at the national level to get other organizations involved. If there is an invitation from the UN, that sometimes make a big difference. So Rolando, thank you so much for sharing. And I'll move on to Jenna and then Francesca, and I'll give the two of you the same question to reflect on. What I'll ask you to do is to think about, you know, the role you both have in working globally and working across sectors. What have you learned to build more resilient data systems in the face of new future crises? So Jenna, the floor is yours. Again, this is a 4-minute round. You have 4 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Ricky. One of the first things I want to highlight is that I really think we've seen that resilience resides, at least in part, in people. So if people have the skills, the agility, the openness, the willingness to collaborate, that they sit within institutions that encourage that kind of approach and attitude, then the possibility to be creative, to be flexible, to work with others is much more likely in regular day-to-day as well as in a crisis. And I think that historically, if I may be so bold, in the official statistics community, that emphasis on those human dimensions and capacities has been lower than it may have been on some of the technical skills. And I think we have been seeing over the years, and especially in the face of crisis, the importance of those human dimensions. So that's one. And that has implications for training, for recruitment, for skill building. The second comes back to the very first lesson that Juan Daniel shared with us, and this is something I see in the work of the Global Partnership, and that is the value and importance of experience sharing and mutual learning and peer exchange, and the way that builds resilience and the way in which it can be done in a crisis to enable anyone dealing with a very difficult situation to understand that not only are they not alone, but there are a lot of hints out there on how to do it. So we've seen opportunities for peer exchange across a huge group of countries. Francesca, we've been collaborating on an administrative data collaborative that's been all about how to leverage administrative data and under the current circumstances. We found in a lot of our work with the Global Partnership, when our team has been engaging with one NSO and they've been talking about a challenge, our ability just to say, well, we know that Ghana has done that before. So let's organize a phone call and just speak for an hour and see where that takes us. And in a lot of cases, it's gone much further than those initial conversations. It's become workshops, it's become other things. And I think that's really important for building a resilient national system, as well as a resilient sort of peer network that can help us through a crisis. And the last one I want to touch on is trust. Juan Daniel, I think, very rightly highlighted the sort of bedrock role of the fundamental principles of official statistics, which enable national statistical offices, of course, to maintain a high level of trust. But at the same time, we've also talked about the opportunities and the need, especially in crisis, to be working with alternative data sources. And frankly, like quality assurance frameworks are fairly esoteric for the ordinary person, but the awareness of the value and role of data, not just amongst policymakers, but amongst ordinary people that Francesca was pointing to, has really raised the temperature, right, around what's happening with my data and what are, especially sharing health data. There are big, big, big governance questions. And we've also seen this crisis has been a pandemic, but we're in crisis as concerns racial justice. We're in crisis globally as concerns climate justice. And there are big questions about the structural inequalities that exist at local, national, and global levels. And data is a big part of that, right? Whether it masks those inequalities or it helps to address them. And fundamentally, right, we need to go back to trust. And I think trust is really key to that resilience. So I'll end it there.
Thank you very much, Jenna. And you actually touched upon enough topics for us to organize another session, I think. But I'll just mention this one word about trust, because this is something that comes up. We talk about integration of data, sharing of data, alternative data sources. But of course, I mean, once we have governance issues, in particular related to the privacy, and we do have a momentum, which is what we heard also before, that there is maybe an increasing willingness right now because of the pandemic for actually moving some of the legislative pieces also in the favor of adding the opportunity for sharing. So there's something to build on here, but of course, a major role also by a national statistical office looking at the data stewardship issue is to be the garant of this type of principles. This is, I think, a discussion that will actually continue for decades to come because things are moving. Francesca, over to you, reflections on the same topic 4 minutes to you.
Thank you, Rike. Well, what we have seen over the pandemic as we worked with partners and we engaged with countries, but I would say also during the first 6 years of the implementation of the SDGs, because a lot of what we've done there is related to building resilience, right? So I think my number one point here is building capacity for effective data storage, exchange, interoperability, so that the different data sets can be linked up and can talk to each other. But we also need to support countries in the development of their institutional, the legal framework, to have the enabling environment, the development of soft skills. Those are important areas that we've seen in our work for NSOs to be able to establish partnerships with a wide range of data providers, including to ensure what Jenna was mentioning, to ensure data quality and to protect data privacy and confidentiality so that we have a balance between data sharing and protection, and so that data can be trusted, talking about trust. Important, I think, also is to build capacity so that the new data solutions can be fully utilized. Many new tools exist, but are not accessible necessarily to all countries. And this is one of the main principles of the Data for Now initiative, of which, of course, Jenna GPSDD is one of the lead entities, and our colleagues in DANE are also key partners, and they work with us for the implementation of that. But I would say also an important focus on actionable data. These last 6 years, the SDG framework has placed so much emphasis on indicators. I think in times of crisis, we need to think in terms of actionable data that can really inform interventions. One important point I want to make here is also not to forget about the foundational statistical systems. CRBS, census, surveys. We still have 40% of countries without a complete birth registration, 40% of countries with an insufficient death registration system. We cannot have a responsive and resilient data system without a functioning CRBS. And if government don't have those basic data, it's impossible for them to deliver the right interventions. Integration of geospatial, I think, information and data and statistics, I think we talked a lot about that, and that's critical. But I would like to add one point here, that to have agile and resilient data system, we need to also make sure that they are part of the disaster risk reduction strategies, that they're fully part of the whole architecture. But for that to happen, we need the right systems of governance and coordination, so that you have the National Statistical Office, the National Statistical Systems, the Geospatial Agency, and all the various institutions working on climate change adaptation, disaster risk reduction, and in the case of the pandemic or other health emergencies, of course, the health institutions. I hope I stayed within the 4 minutes.
I seem to have managed to make all of you nervous. You are perfectly well within the limit here. Thank you so much, Francesca, and thanks also for picking up this issue of the foundations of national statistical systems, because I also do believe that there is actually an opportunity and a momentum for getting those foundations right, because of what you mentioned earlier, Francesca, that the value of data is more in the upfront and center, also in the public mind. And these foundations, it's never quick fixes, and it's very difficult to get both the resources and the institutional support broadly for really improving these. And we are in Asia Pacific warming up to a ministerial conference on civil registration and vital statistics, which is coming up in November this year. And our aim here is to get as much as possible out of the current momentum for getting one of these very foundational systems improved. Because as you rightly say, they are not in place properly in so many countries around the world. And if that's not set straight, well, it has an impact on all the other figures that we are disseminating also in terms of responses to various disasters. So thank you very much for that, Francesca. So we are moving quickly here to the next round of questions to our panelists. We are running a little bit behind time, so for this round, I'll ask all of you to actually stick to 2 minutes in your intervention. What we'll be focusing on here is to dig a little bit deeper into the topic that some of you already touched upon, and that is resilience. And what I'd ask each of you is to mention 2 important aspects of what makes a data ecosystem resilient and able to continue business operations during disasters. So the resilience of a data ecosystems, which is of course linked to a continuation of data and statistics business operations during disasters. And again, you're very welcome to reflect on what you may have heard in earlier sessions of this conference or what you've just heard from your fellow panelists during the past hour here. I'll be a little traditional here as a moderator. I'll invite you in the same order as what we've done so far. So Juan Daniel, you have the pleasure again to start. The next 2 minutes are all yours, please.
Thank you very much. And this is, I think this is very important. This is, I feel that it's the most important part of this conversation because it puts together, for example, what Francesca was mentioning is that resilience is based on the clearness of the foundations of the national statistics system or of the data ecosystem. And the possibility of having clear which are the foundations of the data ecosystem is based, in my perspective, in also having clear which are the main answers that we have to provide to our society. So I believe that a very important enabler of coordination that was mentioned also in the conversation, which is necessary in the data ecosystem, is that we have to understand ourselves, that we have to sit together leaders, followers, but also we have to invite enablers in order to find which is going to be the common purpose of the dialogue, the coordination, and the interoperability that we want to produce or to foster in our data ecosystem. And in this coordination approach, we believe that strategic partnerships, as a matter of example, that have been enabled by the United Nations Statistical Division, the leadership of COSTAT, that in the case of Colombia, we have benefited by the important support from COSTAT, and also some learning communities and innovation communities, such as that we have performed with the leadership of Orlando in the Statistical Conference of the America, are very good examples of how strategic partnerships are very useful in complex times. And finally, we believe that something that make a data ecosystem resilient is that we cannot forget ourselves, which is the main subject of the things that we day-to-day produce, and which are the subjects of our societies, the citizens, the enterprises, civil society organizations. And we believe that the pandemic and these difficult times that we have faced during the last months made us very, very clear that we have to start humanizing official statistics and combining not only sharp data and hard data, but also subjective well-being approaches of measurement, how our citizens are feeling themselves in the complex times that we are facing. So I believe those 3 times, having clear the foundations and the questions that we have to solve, trusting and believing in strategic partnership, taking advantage of a very strong international statistical community, and third, focusing on targeting our citizens as the center of the statistical production is something very important that we believe that is going to allow resilient data ecosystems around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan Daniel, and thanks also for stressing this human dimension. I think it complements very well what we heard also from Jenna before in terms of, you know, the skill space that we should be looking at in statistical institutions. Thank you, Juan. Let's move on to Rolando. So 2 important aspects from you, Rolando, when we talk about resilience. You have the floor, 2 minutes.
Thank you. So to see the data ecosystem resilience first, when we talk about resilience, so at least so we have to know what to do to go back to normality, to the continuity of a statistical project when you have a disaster. So and if you have cleared this process, so it is easy to be resilient. And I think all the fundamental principles, and I think the quality framework that we have applied and all of the standards that we follow through the Statistical Commission and through so we learn and we know how to do it. We know the way to do this process, and the countries and in our region, for example, and in ESCAP or ECLAC. So in the Statistical Commission, we have the continuity and try to apply and continue to give these procedures to the countries and try to continue to applying these issues. If we have clear in each country that they have to apply standards, they have to apply the quality of assurance, and they have to apply the fundamental principles, so they are going to be able to rebuild again this procedure. And in addition, I think, which is very important, so we have to give the countries a new statistical laws in the governments, with the government. So in our region, we have heard at least for 5 or 6 countries that are working in these new arrangements to identify and try to go to the Congress to have the new laws in this regards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rolando. And I think you're pointing to this, you know, the role that regional organizations really can play also here when we talk about resilience, the normative work, but certainly also the work to inspire and convene and put some new, let's say, recommended best practices on the floor, convene the sharing of experiences among the countries in their region. Thank you very much, Rolando. And let's move on to Jenna. Jenna, you have the floor.
Thanks, Rike. So my 2 thoughts. The first builds on a lot of what's been said already about that enabling environment for partnerships. I feel like I can't not emphasize that. That goes to the legal and regulatory environment as well as the skills and capacity. And when that is there, and the experience of having done partnerships in different ways, and then being able to replicate it in times of crisis is obviously critical, and has been critical for the pandemic. The second point is really building on these sort of human skills and dimensions and these ideas of trust that I was mentioning, and around I think an element, perhaps newer element of the resilience of statistical systems goes to how to engage people and what role might ordinary citizens play in the collection and production of data, and how to sort of expand people's agency around that, so that there's a greater understanding of what the process is, so that there's a greater understanding of those partnerships, so that there's a greater inclusion of different groups and communities that are affected, so that those communities may be able to define how those measurements are done and how they're then used in policies that may affect them. And that then builds that kind of relationship of trust, strengthens that core system, I think, and builds a greater support for those foundational systems. And it really goes to this evolving role of the data steward, or the functions of data stewardship across the national statistical system. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Jenna. And I was just thinking back on your earlier comment on the fact that resilience resides in people, and what I'm hearing from you now are some of the measures statistical institutions can actually take to leverage that resilience, and also do theirs to increase the resilience of people when it comes to the data that actually enables them to be better informed of decisions. So Jenna, thanks so much for those comments. Francesca.
Yes, thank you, Rike. Well, I think I listed several aspects of resilience in our previous round, but I'd like to go back to one that I think is particularly important to me, and that is the ability to use different data sets and integrate them. And that requires two main things: the data interoperability and the right legal and institutional framework in place. For the aspects, the reasons I mentioned earlier, the protection of privacy, the quality assurance in the use of data sources, especially when you try to tap into new data sources and can be used in a fast and safely way, and safely in times of crisis, so that the data can be trusted. But there is another aspect that I would like to mention, and that is the issue of the resilient data systems are no use unless we cover all the important groups of the population. We need to know where the vulnerabilities are. In times of crisis, when a disaster hits, it becomes particularly hard to reach those that are the most affected, the more vulnerable parts of the population. And we go back to the foundational systems. Having a strong, well-functioning CRVS system and other administrative data is very important. When we surveyed the National Statistical offices with the COVID-19 survey, together with the World Bank on statistical operations, a large percentage of countries indicated that they had problems covering migrants, internally displaced people, rural population, older people, etc., persons with disability. And one of the reasons they indicated, the number one reason, was that they could not be reached by phone or web-based survey. So we need to think very carefully. We build a resilient system, we tap into all different data sources, but we need to keep in mind where the vulnerabilities are, be aware of what tools we use, and making sure we capture them. We capture the most vulnerable groups, because those are the ones that are the most affected by the pandemic, by all crises, by situations of conflicts, and as unfortunately we are witnessing currently. Over to you, Rika.
Thank you, Francesca. And what you're just mentioning is reminding me of a very interesting debate that I was privy to a few weeks ago, where we discussed, what is a natural disaster. And the argument was, well, there is no such thing as a natural disaster, because we define disasters by an event that has an impact on people, on the economy, on the environment. And the impact is always a function on how we organize ourselves as societies. Therefore, they are all human-induced, one way or the other. And I think that may be something to take note of also when we build these foundations for our national data systems. The points you were just mentioning, that if we build foundational systems where we know that it is potentially the people in the most vulnerable situations where we will actually lose the information the first, then we have to put a big question mark on the resilience of a system like this. So thanks very much, Francesca, for these reflections. And what I've just checked, and we do not have questions from our audience. And that is both good and bad, because it means, of course, that we do not have the interaction with the audience, but it also means that we can move ahead to the last round of hearing from our experts here on the panel, which means that I think we are more or less back on time. So in that sense, it's all both good and bad, just as we've heard in terms of lessons from the pandemic. So we are well in tune with our times in this roundtable. And what I would like you to do here in the last round is to give us a little reflection. And this is the creative round of this panel. You're very, very much invited to let your mind expand, look into the future, and just tell us briefly, what would you really like to see happen in terms of a change as we move forward, and no doubt will be met with disasters in the future also to come. And I'll just give you each 2 minutes also for that final reflection. And since we've just done it the whole roundtable, let's not change the order here at the end. I hope you don't mind, Juan, to start with you again. You've done excellently so far. So Juan Daniel, the floor is yours for the last time here. 2 minutes, huh?
Thank you, Rike, and congratulations for such an excellent role as the moderating this important conversation, because we have seen several stages in the value of the conversation that we have performed. Something that, in order to be very clear, that we would like to see happening is that we provide our societies some way of evidence-based grasping about the value of official statistics. Yeah, and something that Francesca was mentioning in some of her comments is that society is starting to see that even if data is limitless, there is an important value of official statistics. And this is something that could be very, very, very important and very enlightening, that our societies grasp the value of official statistics, because this is going to provide some purposes of being granular, being equity-oriented, or being gender sensitive, for example, or implementing differential approaches, because this is something that happens once that you have a very sound set of principles, but at the same time, you have a very smart innovation attitude in order to integrate alternative sources of information and keeping on your promises and keeping on your principles. So I would be very happy if together, working together in the international statistical community with the leadership of the United Nations Statistical Division and several entities that have been essential during the last months in developing capabilities around the world from a statistical offices is that we can develop a single and common voice to telling our societies official statistics and the value of official statistics is essential in order to provide a smart recovery and at the same time to build back better in the sustainable development agenda. This is my dream, let's say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for putting it so eloquently, Juan Daniel. Let's move on to Eklag and Rolando for thoughts about the future. Rolando, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rike. And I'm going to talk about from the regional perspective as is my case. So in this regard, I think the regional offices and the regional aspects, so they react quickly to attend and to coordinate from the statistical side the different problems that countries were facing during the pandemic. But and one of the things that it was very important and we tried to implement was the coordination in between the countries and the coordination inside the different ministries and the different aspects. So one aspect that really we would like to see in the future is the participation of the private sector. For example, so we saw the coordination and that the telephonic companies give a lot of information to the statistical offices to produce a lot of geoportals and a lot of, in our region at least. So we saw one in Colombia, Mexico, and some other countries that we could see. But because the private sector, the companies give the information to the statistical offices, and that didn't happen before. And what is very important is try to learn from these disasters like the pandemic and to see how to be coordinated in a better way. I think this is the things that I would like to see in the future, this kind of coordination, and of course, the way as a regional offices try to react better, quicker, just to give. In our region, we have more than 17 webinars during 9 months, trying to apply different methodologies to participate, to give this capacity building to the countries to react in this project. So this is the way that I would like to see. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rolando. I'll hand it over to Jenna for some futuristic thinking. Jenna, please.
Yeah, I think that a lot of what we've been discussing today really comes down to strategic investment. So when you prioritize a system, right, those foundational data systems, the value of official statistics, as a government or as an entity, it comes down to allocating the appropriate amount of resources, financial, and then of course human. And what is the full spectrum of the strategy that goes into building a smarter, more interoperable, more capable system that's able to partner with diverse agencies, right? That has the legal and regulatory framework to back it up. It all requires time and energy, and that goes to investment. So it's about making the national data ecosystem a strategic priority as sort of underpinning infrastructure of the entire system, and investing in it as a strategic priority. That's the vision, I think.
Thank you very much. I've just underlined the word strategic on my notepad here. We've heard a lot about that actually from all of you. And Jenna, thank you so much. And Francesca, last round for you, last speaker for this roundtable. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Rike. I think my dream is similar to Jenna's. What I hope to see is a real change in the way we approach all this, more investment in data and in information infrastructure. A year into the pandemic, only 60 countries had data on COVID-19 infection and death that were disaggregated by sex and age. I think that's unacceptable. We really need to change the way we look at data, the way we prioritize data production. And my hope is that we've learned enough of what these serious data shortages have meant over these 18 months to see now a real change, new investments, a new way we use funds, a smarter way to use funds, more mobilization of domestic resources. And we should not forget also one aspect, that to have a full digital transformation, we need to connect those people that are not connected. And that's 50% of the world's population. So we cannot implement many of our new digital solutions unless all those are connected. We cannot leave half of the world population behind. So now the statisticians need to be part of this process. And data, really, we need to see data as an asset. And data production and use should be prioritized. Over to you, Vic.
Thank you very much, Francesca. And you've very, very nicely brought us to the end of this panel. You know, we said, or this roundtable as it's called, but you know, we set out to figure out what we've learned from previous crises and the ongoing pandemic. And I want to thank all of you for your reflections here, because I think we can summarize it into, you know, we have actually learned a lot. And we could maybe even say what Francesca just said, well, we've learned enough. Now it's actually time to do on the basis of all these learnings. And we have actually run a little bit past our scheduled time. So I will let that be my final words also as the moderator of this roundtable. And thank you so much. Thanks to the audience who listened in. Thank you to our 4 excellent panelists here. It's been a real pleasure. I hope I'm not the only one who learned a lot. So I wish, well, all of you, since you're in the Western Hemisphere, a very good night. And I'll wish the rest of my fellow Asians here a very good day going forward. So thank you so much. Pleasure.
Let me thank Ms. Hansen and the panelists for a great discussion highlighting value of solid foundational systems for resilience. This brings us to the end of the first part on day 3 of the ICOS. We will adjourn the conference and resume it in 4 hours, that is at 3:30 p.m. in Seoul, 8:30 a.m. in Geneva, and 2:30 a.m. in New York. We appreciate your attendance at this conference despite challenging schedules and hope to see many of you in the next session. Thank you.